Hi guys, welcome back to IELTS and TOEFL with Yuva. Many of you have asked me, which test should I take? The IELTS or the new TOEFL that starts in July 2023? In this video, I show you how to choose between the IELTS and the new TOEFL. Let's get started. The IELTS and TOEFL are both tests that give an idea of your English language skills. They are both accepted by over 10,000 universities and institutions around the world. So how do you decide which test to take? The first question you need to ask yourself is, does the school accept the test? I'm not joking. This is the most important fact to check. If your dream school only accepts one of the tests, that is the one to take. TOEFL is more common in American universities and IELTS is more common in Europe. However, don't just assume your school will accept your score. Look up that information as soon as possible. If the institution accepts both, then it's your choice. Let me show you how you can figure out which test to take. An important point to consider is when and where you can take the tests. This will definitely influence your decision about which test you want to take. Both tests now have online versions. You can take the IELTS online or the TOEFL Home Edition. You can also take the tests in the test center on a computer or on paper. However, the TOEFL offers a paper version for specific countries only. The IELTS paper version is much more common. The online version eliminates the need to travel, but you must have access to a computer and internet system that supports the program, and you need a place to concentrate while taking the test. For example, if you share an apartment and use a smartphone rather than a computer, you should consider going to a test center. Check the places and times that are available. If you can't easily get to one, that will affect which test you take. You might also have a tight deadline for turning in your scores, so you may need to settle for the soonest test possible. If you have plenty of time, you have more freedom to choose the test that best highlights your skills. The next point to think about is the length of the tests, so how much time they take. That's an important point because the longer the test, the harder it is to concentrate. And here, the IELTS and the new TOEFL really differ. That could be decisive for your choice. Both tests have 4 sections that cover the skills of reading, writing, listening, and speaking. The new TOEFL test is much shorter than in the past. It's under 2 hours long. That's a huge selling point. By contrast, the IELTS is about 2.5 hours long. Here's a breakdown of the sections. As for length, IELTS listening and TOEFL listening are almost the same, but the IELTS has more questions. Now, let's check out reading. The new TOEFL is about half as long. TOEFL reading takes 35 minutes, while IELTS reading takes 60 minutes. That's a really big difference. If you get tired out reading, the TOEFL is a good choice. But don't just go on length. If you're really good at reading, then you might be able to boost your score using the extra questions on the IELTS. The TOEFL writing section is also about half as long, so if you don't want to write a long essay, you may want to choose the TOEFL. The number of questions is the same though, so if you are a really slow typist, you might want the extra time for the IELTS. Another point to consider is the scoring. I find IELTS writing harder than TOEFL writing. Honestly, I think it's easier to get a high score in TOEFL writing. So if writing is not your strength, you may want to consider the TOEFL. Let's have a look at speaking. The length of the speaking section is about the same. However, the IELTS allows you to take the speaking portion up to 1 week before or after the test. If that is a challenging section for you, you might want to take the IELTS so you can approach it fresh on a different day. I found it really hard to take my IELTS speaking test after I had taken all the other sections because I was quite tired and it was hard to concentrate. Let's have a closer look at the speaking test because IELTS and TOEFL speaking are very different. Ask yourself this question. Do I mind talking to a computer? This is a very important factor that can really affect your final score. One major difference between the two tests is that the IELTS has an interviewer and the TOEFL does not. So even if you are taking the IELTS online, you are talking to someone via a video call, whereas in the TOEFL, you are just speaking to an inanimate screen. How does that affect your score? Well, some people get stage fright and can't talk well when they need to talk to a new person. If that sounds like you, consider the TOEFL, where you don't have to talk to a real person. On the other hand, you may not like trying to say answers to a blank screen and find that your speaking style is too halting or doesn't sound natural when talking to a computer. In that case, consider taking the IELTS. The speaking section is a quarter of your score, so remember that and try to choose the test that best highlights your skills. Another crucial point that you must take into account are the different questions. The IELTS and the TOEFL ask different questions in the reading and listening sections. The TOEFL has multiple choice questions, so you have to choose between answers. You pick the best answer, A, B, C, or D. Some questions require you to pick more than one answer, but all of the choices are given for you. If your English is not so advanced, the multiple choice questions are great because even if you have no clue, you can eliminate answers that don't look right and select between the remaining ones. By contrast, the IELTS has a lot of different types of question. It has multiple choice, true, false, not given, and so on. You also will find questions where you need to label the parts of a diagram or fill in a blank to complete a sentence with your own words. There are all sorts of questions, and that can be very intimidating. However, if you're good at reading and listening, you might be able to showcase your skills using the variety of questions on the IELTS test. Next, let's check out the writing section. IELTS writing and TOEFL writing are very different. TOEFL writing includes an integrated essay and the new academic discussion task. In this task, you need to write a post that develops the conversation. It doesn't have to be a formal essay structure, so it's a great question if you like using a more casual style. By contrast, in IELTS writing, you need to describe a diagram or chart and write an essay. Describing a chart is very easy for some people and really difficult for others. Therefore, I highly recommend thinking about how you feel about charts. If you have a strong background in identifying trends and following process diagrams, you might really be able to shine on the IELTS test. If you're not comfortable with charts, go with the TOEFL. Finally, we will have a look at the scoring. In both the IELTS and the TOEFL, you will get scores for each section and a total score for the entire test. In the IELTS, you get a band score of 0 to 9 for each section, and the total score is an average, so you end up with a final band score of 0 to 9. In the TOEFL, you get a score of 0 to 30 for each section, and the total is the combination of those, so your final score is 0 to 120. All of the institutions that accept the scores know what those numbers mean, but some people prefer one style over the other. The downside of the IELTS scoring is that an average may take your total score down if you have a low skill in one area. On the other hand, you might like the idea of an overall score that is an easy summary. The choice is personal, really. For example, To get into an average undergraduate program, you will probably need an IELTS band score of 6 or a TOEFL score of about 60 to 78. If you fall into the bottom of the range of the TOEFL, the IELTS score may sound more competitive. To wrap up, remember that your English skills are the same, but each test highlights different strengths and weaknesses. If the institution accepts both, select the one that really showcases your skills. That's it. That's 8 points to help you decide between the IELTS and the new TOEFL. I hope you guys liked this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye!